There are huge and as yet untapped possibilities available to us if we adopt an experiential ontology with respect to image making. These possibilities will not emerge by forcing the records produced by our current instrumentation, hewn from a strict adherence to third-party ontology. Such records are remote. For example, the painter has learned to invite a viewer's mind to generate aspects of perceptual reality from less than the requisite set of cues, holding back on the supply of definitive information or data in the image. This is not just possible to enact, it can actually enhance the take-out experience. The viewer becomes entangled with the messaging in something akin to a dialogue, so elevating their status from just a passive recipient reading a news item. The phenomenon of vision is, as with all our other senses, a matter of engagement with and not the projection of. To an inquiring mind, the degree of engagement required becomes itself a form of communication, forming an exchange between the parties with degrees of depth and insight. Visual art is not a communique. What's withheld, and the way it is withheld, has to resonate with the viewer's perceptual system. The structure of the media therefore tells us something about who we are, and if not, then perhaps about what we have become. This form of perceptual dialogue is also not comparable with that required to approach conceptual art. If the viewer's perceptual system is creatively engaged in the process of realizing something, then the activity becomes more alive, with a correspondingly higher immersive buy-in. We are reaching for embodiment. In this respect, less can be more. The communication of visual meaning is certainly not related to the density of pixels forming a picture. This knowing play by the artists both entertains and engages, but also raises serious questions as to the nature of reality. In handling these questions, it should become possible to re-engineer artificial stimuli, to improve messaging across our information display systems by improving capacity over mere density. There is nothing more fundamental than this, nothing more far-reaching. Why do our current information display systems slavishly work towards the provision of as much detail as possible? Because, in cultural terms, we're preconditioned to accept content in this format, because doing so satisfies a superficial preconception that more detail must make things clearer and hence more immersive. That as we apply more detail faster with less noise to visual displays, we move inexorably and incrementally closer to the generation of virtual reality. Surely, any subjective content to be generated by the individual can occur by looking at the fine, optically structured media, right? Unfortunately, there's nothing virtual about reality. Reality occurs to us as we engage with the real world and not as we engage with our instrumentation. VR's a misconcept, bound up in representation. Itself a child of third-party ontology and the age of enlightenment. VR works with us to generate an artificial reality. It's difficult to understand why this approach to the nature of reality has become so pervasive and why we've allowed it to stand in for the real deal. Experiential reality and what that connects us to. To buy into VR, we actually have to suppress critical aspects of who we are. In view of the prevailing attitude, and in order that the essentials of perceptual structure were posed clearly enough to invite the possibility of us conducting simplistic comparative experimentation, I engaged in as little artistic creative play in my work as possible. The hope being that the scientific disciplines would be less inclined to discount the content or pertinence and engage with the experiential order underpinning the stimuli. The sheer complexity of the imagery produced by visual artists may ultimately be the reason why at a scientific and technological level the contribution of the discipline is routinely passed over. The expectation is that with the basics of perceptual structure and vision space articulated in previous presentations, that I can now relax a bit and take a more creative and playful stance without sacrificing any attention earned from the scientific community in the vision space story. So to business, what's new here? After the scene has been drawn and measured to establish the extents of perceptual condensation, it's possible to mess about with the photographic or optical records to push their extents into some sort of experiential fit. The two then provide a platform from which to undertake the painting. Of course, I also frequently revisit the real setting to make up any shortfall or to clarify. The figure was shot separately and fixation located around the eyes. While fixated, the edges to the surfaces and objects appearing in contextual vision are defined by large spatial differentials, expressed in values articulated by the size of brush mark, all tied back to reference in relation to the fixation point. There are of course the more familiar differentials in brightness and colour that support the spatial values, by assisting with grouping strategies and the comprehension of areas. In situations where the differential in values becomes less extreme and so less informative, the areas add little to the overall spatial saliency of the scene. As mentioned previously, I'd usually dutifully record all these values despite their weak contribution in terms of spatial comprehension, but here I resist the urge to infill. This leaves just the light blue and grey blue areas of the underpainting showing through. These colour tones just serve as the neutral base for the articulation of values. The tone is just selected to best offset the different luminosities of the paint used to present levels of brightness occurring in the real setting or scene. So the intent is to show only what's required to articulate the space well enough to comprehend, orientate and navigate within the scene. The suggestion is that what's depicted actually corresponds to what we perceive of a scene at any one moment in time. Leaving these areas blank draws our attention to what would otherwise be passed over as we move through the scene, or perhaps not even reach consciousness to be passed over. This would suggest that large areas of phenomenal field generated on a moment-to-moment basis contribute little, if anything, to our comprehension of our surroundings. The implicit nature of contextual spatial vision suggests that a good deal of neuronal firing must be linked to threshold criteria, and a good proportion of that must be associated with pre-conscious processing, delivering implicit spatial awareness prior to explicit conscious consideration. We would appear to have a system in contextual vision working to detect differentials in order to realise the proximity of edges or steep gradients, prior to any notion of object or surface being formed. Contextual vision being about weighting, not detail. All of this activity contributing to the formation of implicit subconscious spatial awareness, and be both sparse and, in pictorial terms, full of holes. If within the phenomenon we aren't attending to areas with either of the visual pathways, how would we even know that the areas aren't being presented? How many times do we hear the phrase, "I just didn't see it"? If the essential salience of contextual vision is based on such differentials, then it should be meaningful to structure media content on this basis. In following the above parameters, a painting or image completes, with roughly 50% of it empty or failing to register pertinent information. The suggestion being that if we lead a viewer's fixation within media, either through storytelling or by capturing gaze data in real time, we can perhaps leave out less interesting areas of a scene without suffering a commensurate loss of takeout meaning. Would this trivial or unattended data actually be missed in a moving image sequence? Indeed, would the absence of this data actually increase the saliency or visual takeout from the media, while reducing the bandwidth required to message? I think we'd need to approach the issues of substantiating absence in phenomenal field by creating a vision space presentation system in the form of a graphics engine. The engine would be fed information relating to where an individual was looking to correctly provision central vision and mimic the associated perceptual processes in order that an evaluation could be made as to whether the gaps being created were noticed by the viewer in their contextual vision. To be clear, I don't see these absent zones as being fixed, even with the head held still looking at a still life subject. I envisage them as being in existence for fleeting moments of time, suggesting a gentle flow of information across contextual vision that sifts for differentials between spatial values. Being unaware of an area within phenomenal field is not the same thing as being aware of a hole or a blank area of a canvas. The not seeing is not the same thing as forgetting the name of something we already know has a name if only we could recall it. In implicit terms, there isn't a perceptually complete picture for the space to be absent from. We may be tempted to use phrases like perceptual compression to describe this minimal system of presentation, but that'd be misleading. It's no more compression than vision space condensation is compression. It isn't valid to envisage that the perceptual system somehow takes stuff away from some full picture representation of the real. There aren't any pictures to compress in this way. Nothing is taken away, it just doesn't present. And yes, of course, it's highly efficient. It provides a good bang for our bucks. All this awareness occurs to us prior to us considering what is going on, and then thinking about representing that in terms of drawn lines and edges, etc. Most people don't hear themselves listening or see themselves looking. They naturally just hear what they listen to and see what they are looking at. So it's difficult for an artist to communicate the inner life that informs us as to the nature of reality and our relationship with the real. If there is interest, it's usually in talking about the situation, as opposed to getting hands-on dirty in the direct exploration of it. It is, however, only this endeavour that's going to take us further to identify working technological solutions leading to perceptual technologies. Your God knows I've tried. So now I tone back the absences in order that they are not so dominant, in the hope that doing so might make the work more appealing. I need to make a buck from all of this endeavour, but I'm not holding my breath. As I am frequently reminded from all directions, there's just no appetite for this sort of thing, you know. Why don't you lay your brushes aside and jolly well avail yourself of some formaldehyde?